Namaskar Sathiyo. Today we are going to discuss about New Left. We often hear about left and right as two broad ideological, formations. And as we already know that the left and right, it has an origin in the French Revolution. After the French Revolution, when the assembly was convened, those who were rich and affluent and came from the elite sections of the society, they sat on the right of the chair. And those who had revolted, participated in the revolution, and represented the common people, they sat on the left side of the chair. And since then, the term left and right has been used. But as an ideology, left and right is now a very well understood term. Left that demands and focuses on equality in the society, and the right that focuses on the liberty in the society. Broadly, it's a representative of vis-a-vis liberty versus right versus equality kind of a thing. Those who are for right, they often insist on liberty being the predominant theme in the society and all those consequential things. And those who are on the right, those who are on the left, they emphasize on the equality in society and whatever that may mean, and through whatever means that may come. Now, whenever we use the term left, we are referring to some very distinguished thinkers like Marx, Lenin, Stalin, and so on and so forth. Very, very long list of people who gave you a scientific proposition of what socialism is, and that ideology is called communism. So basically, the socialist and the communist, they together constitute what we call the left. But what is this new left, and how the term originated, and what are the main philosophical propositions of this new left? What are the basic tenets? Who were the main propounders of this? How it was carried? Who were the main leaders? And what ultimately happened? Which era this new left, was a dominant movement or ideology or whatever. So all this we are going to discuss in this video, and that's why it's a very interesting discussion. Most of my students, they have always been confused about the left and the new left, and how new is the new left, and how old has the new left become. All these things, they continue to haunt their minds, and so I decided that today we'll talk about this new left. Actually, new left is a very specifically placed historical segment, and that you would call probably post Second World War until the end of 1970s. During this era of say 15-20 years, you find that the new left was a dominant thought, a dominant movement, a dominant protest movement, or even you can say some kind of an ideology. Now, how is this? Let's go to the backdrop. It happened that the way Marxian, which is the old left, was implemented in the USSR by Stalin. Many were very unhappy with all those persecutions that were happening in the Stalinist Russia, and they were not only unhappy, but they wanted to make certain amendments in Marxism. They wanted to change Marxism, and therefore many people would not agree with them and say that they are they are misled people, or they are trying to dilute or revise Marxism. But at the same time, you would be surprised to know that the people who were they were not very happy with the Marxist philosophy or ideology as it was visible in the Stalinist Russia. They were not only not happy with this, they were also not very happy with whatever was happening in the capitalist world. So there was a dilemma, and that dilemma was aggravated by the American intervention in the Vietnam War, and the way America tried to, kill people in Vietnam. Even many people in America, they rose to protest, and therefore they thought that America need to be socialized. Whereas the people who were suffering Stalinist Russia, they thought that they need to move on from Marxism and towards some kind of a better world. So therefore, in those post-war scenario, we find that neither the Stalinist Russia portraying a Marxian philosophy at that time was not acceptable to this group, nor the way capitalist liberalism was flourishing in America and elsewhere in Europe, they were, impressing them. So there was a kind of a dilemma. They were neither capitalist liberals nor they were Stalinist Marxists, and therefore, what were they? And this new group which emerged, which was dissatisfied with both the ideological camps, the Marxist as well as the capitalists, they came to occupy a center stage, and they were given the name of the New Left. And this is the phenomena of 1960s, when in 1960 it acquired the shape of a protest and a protest movement. Going a little back, in 1956, you find that Khrushchev, very, in very strong terms, he condemned Stalin at the 20th Congress of the Soviet Communist Party, and that was also the year of Soviet invasion of Hungary. So, I mean, the Soviet supremacy and the Soviet communism was becoming detestable. It was not becoming acceptable to the even the left people, the Marxist people, and that's why many call them the red diaper. People that who had come from the left, but they were still babies in the capitalist world, or they were in the liberal camp. So the red diapers babies, they were trying to understand how they could bring some element of socialism into the liberal world, into the capitalist liberal world. And therefore many liberals in be it France, England, Europe, Asia, and even Africa, they were changing gears. And some of the prominent ones were Mao in Asia, Tito, Fidel Castro, and socialist movements in Africa. If you, I mean, Fidel Castro won in Cuba, and Martin Luther King was leading a protest in Alabama, USA. So all these things got not only as a stray protest, which was acquiring a global, connection, but it also got converted into a worldwide movement. In most of the countries, you could see this kind of protest emerging in the 1960s. To be very specific, in 1962, a group of students collected at the university in Michigan, USA, to discuss politics. And this group was a small group. On this group produced a statement which is called the Port Huron Statement. Port Huron Statement. And this Port Huron Statement was a kind of a manifesto for the New Left, what they wanted. And the guiding principle in this entire Port Huron Statement was that they rejected hierarchy and they rejected bureaucracy. These two things, they were not acceptable to. They actually wanted a kind of a participatory democracy, and they wanted to replace the corporate liberalism with participatory democracy. By participatory democracy, they meant that in the process of decision making affecting their lives on a day-to-day basis, they should be participating in the decision making process. That was their main thing. They realized that neither it was possible in the communist Stalinist communism, or nor it was available in the capitalist liberalism. And the common man had no locus in the decision making process, and therefore their entire focus was, this was their guiding principle, that somehow if you want to provide equality to the human beings, then you have to have a share in the give them a share in the decision making process. And therefore their core concerns were multiculturalism, their core concern was social justice, it was equality, and it was peace, because they were also anti-Vietnam, adventures of the American government. And therefore, multiculturalism, social justice, equality, and peace, they were their prime concerns. And this concern got manifested through several, stray movement, be it gay movement, be it civil rights movement, be it women's liberty movement, be it anti-Vietnam protest movement, etc., etc. All these movements, they also, as a, support system, they came in favor of the what was called the New Left movement. And Tom Hayden was the key figure in this entire left movement, who emerged as the leader of the entire New Left. And therefore, under his leadership, the New Left acquired a kind of an international stature, and it not only remained the American thing, it became available globally in the Western Europe, in Japan, in so many other countries, in US, even in India. You can say some element of that you can see at that point of time, anti-caste movements and anti-language movements, etc., etc. So everywhere you can see that there was some kind of a domination, and the entire emphasis was on the acquiring of a new identity, which they called New Left. It was a left which was not very clear about its ideological dispositions, but it was very clear about certain fundamental, concerns all over the globe. And thus we find that in view to implement their concerns, in view to address their concerns, they were not very keen to segregate the violent and the non-violent. They would rather go amalgamate the non-violent with the violent means. And therefore, in the New Left, it was neither purely violent nor purely non-violent, but there was a kind of an amalgamation of both the means. And they wanted that, okay, change should come, but change should certainly come. And the kind of pace that the change was requiring, they were not very happy. And therefore, whenever they thought that a little violence would be necessary to transform the society, they wanted to draw attention to the people of America and the world by even using and resorting to violent methods. However, a very, very, thought out process. They would bomb empty buildings and would ensure that human loss is not there, but certainly they would resort to some violent methods also. They wanted to draw attention of the American society, especially since it was a student movement, basically led by students. They wanted to draw the attention of American society to two things. One is that they were unhappy with the racism existing in the American society, and the second was that they were also unhappy with the intervention of the American in the Vietnam, where civil rights violations were alarming. And therefore, these two things they were very much concerned about. Actually, this movement started as stray movement, and gradually it was not very numerous. But as the movement and protests grew, more and more people, more and more segments of the society, they started joining. And not only that, that even intellectuals, some intellectuals, though it was not a purely intellectual led movement, but some intellectuals were drawn to this New Left, in which Herbert Marcuse, Norman O. Brown, Paul Goodman, Michael Harrington, and C. Wright Mill's name is very prominent. And what they did was that these, intellectuals, these scholars, they documented at least three things. One was that they said that there was a growing concentration of power in the hands of social elites, be it the Western world or be it the communist world. There, a social elite group was emerging, and in both the societies, the communist society and the liberal society, so-called liberal society, American society, the elites were, having final control of the power, so political power. The second was that in both situations, in both societies, they were unhappy that in the land of plenty there was persistence of poverty. Poverty was visible in America, poverty was visible in Soviet Russia. So, in the land of plenty, there was poverty. That was their second documented thing. And the third was that they tried to show stresses and injustice in the American social order. And C. Wright Mills even wrote a letter to the New Left. And in this New Left, he explained why he was unhappy with the Marxian leftism or old leftism, and why he was actually with the new left. And he gave three reasons, basic three reasons. One is that in Marxian leftism and in capitalist liberalism, in both, he saw that they were not open to criticism. That was one. The Marxians were, the second thing was that if you try to criticize Marx, they would confuse, they were confuse it with systematic or structural criticism. They were not able to understand that there is a difference between ideological criticism and systemic or structural criticism. And any kind of criticism they would take as pessimism, because the entire communist philosophy was founded on a historical optimism. And historical optimism, that Marxian dialectics, that society is haves and haves not, haves are little, haves not are more. There would be a violent conflict, and ultimately the workers, the proletariat will win, and there would be established a social order in which there would be a dictatorship of the proletariat, and ultimately all the people who are rich will be killed and power will get transferred into the hands, or so on and so forth. Ultimately, there would be established a classless and stated society in which there would be perfect equality. So all these optimism, they would brush everything as pessimism, and therefore they would not take any kind of criticism. And the third is that they said that if you go to the other side, that is the capitalist world, you find Daniel Bell's end of ideology, who says that all ideologies will ultimately fade away, and ultimately it will be the capitalist liberalism that will survive. So both, they said, C. Wright Mill says that both, be it the left or be it the right, they would not accept, they were not open to criticism. And therefore he said that the new left is fundamentally different from the old left in three ways. One is that the new left was distancing themselves or itself from the Soviet Union and the Soviet Marxism. That was one. The second was that the new left was distancing from proletariat revolution and focusing on young intellectuals, basically the student intellectuals. And the third was that they were not oriented to the class or the class conflict kind of a thing, but they brought them into the realm of the culture. That something, the cultural thing was more important, how it was behaving, the political culture or the social culture, that was the main thing. And in both, the dominant thing was that they would have shut you up and not allow any kind of criticism of their own system. So there wasn't a class conflict, they said, that was a cultural issue. And this is different in the new left vis-a-vis the old left. And this all these differences between the new left and the old left, they got boost from several movements. To mention some of them, one was the black movement, black liberation movement. The blacks were fighting for racial equality, etc. in America, white versus black. That the Martin Luther King Jr. was a great proponent of that, and ultimately, he was shot dead over there. The second was the women's liberation movement. Many women, they came up, the second wave of women liberation, that coincided with this kind of new left in America. And many women, they came for women rights to support this. Gay movement was another that also came to join the new left. And finally, the radical students, the students who were not very happy with the peace initiatives only of the capitalist liberal side. They would also they will also they will also go for some kind of radical things or even violent things. And but however, in all these four movements, the black movement, the women's liberation movement, the gay movement, and the student movement, one thing was very interesting, and that was that the groups were not cohesive so far as the means of conducting the movement was concerned, new left movement was concerned. And some of them in all the four movements would support the reformist approach, and others would take the revolutionary approach. So this was a fundamental disagreement, and that's why these four movements were only partially, helping to carry forward the new left. And there was right from the beginning and from the word go, there was some kind of disagreement between the two so far as the means were concerned. And finally, we can say that the entire emphasis of the new left was to some kind of socialize or bring socialism to the American world. And there was also an attempt to see that the Stalinist communism is not the real communism or true communism. So they were both rejecting the two major ideological positions and creating a space in between the left and the right, and that's they were called the new left. However, they did not carry forward the violent means to much further, because many in the left movement, students as they were, young as they were, realized that if they would carry this movement violently carry too far, then they might invite the authority backlash. And if they invite the authority backlash and there are killings and all, then ultimately the entire thing would be counterproductive. So in the decade of 1960s and by the end of the 1970s, we find that the new left movement as a movement had come to an end, and most of the people who were involved and front runners in the new left movement, they had receded to their original positions and had gone to the liberal position and proclaimed, even formed certain parties which they called liberal parties. So today, by the end of 70s, the new left had lost all the steam. And as you know very well, that by the time 90s, the old left has almost the dominant pillar of the old left, that this is the USSR, had completely disintegrated. And a very strong blow to the old left has also taken place. So by 1970s, you find that the new left had gone down or finished, and by 1990s, you find that a very dominant pillar of the old left had also gone down, and therefore a very major dent was made into the left ideology and left movement and left systems in the world. And thereafter, but one thing we must also remember, and that is that the new left might have died, or even the old left might have under in Russia suffered a huge blow, but at the same time, the relevance of equality, the relevance of protest, the relevance of criticism exists. And therefore, as an ideology, the new left continues to be an interesting ideology. So I am sure this brief discussion about the new left would have given you some, food for thought. Please read about it, and if you have any questions, you are most welcome. Thank you very much.